Well, let's shift over now to talk about taxes. President Joe Biden is set to propose an increase on the capital gains and income tax rates for wealthy Americans. But one issue with passing the plan will be drumming up support from party members who'd be impacted by those very changes. We have Yahoo Finance's own Rick Newman standing by to discuss this with us. Rick, you've been watching this closely, and so based on your analysis, Democrats might actually be the ones most affected by these proposals.
Yeah, so Biden obviously has a lot of plans to raise taxes. And the old adage, of course, is that Democrats are the ones who like to tax and spend the most. But there have been some changes among the parties during the last, let's say, 20 years. And by some measures, Democrats actually represent more wealthy Americans in 2021 than the Republican Party does. I looked at an analysis of median income by congressional district. And of the 50 congressional districts with the highest median income, 42 of those are represented by Democrats. So what that tells you is when Democrats do put forward legislation to raise the capital gains tax rate on wealthy Americans, let's say, that they're going to be taxing their own constituents. And I think the takeaway there is that Biden is not going to get all the tax hikes he wants. I mean, we've been talking about this a lot, but I think a good rule of thumb is take Biden ask on raising taxes and cut it in half. And that might be what Democrats, as far as Democrats in Congress are willing to go for some of these tax hikes.
Yeah, taxing your own constituents, a bit of a strange strategy, but of course, also strange to see some of wealthy Americans call to be taxed too. So we're going to see how that one shakes out. But on the other side of all this, Rick, we're also looking at President Biden's plans for minimum wage when it comes to federal contractors. Of course, minimum wage and a $15 minimum wage has long been a progressive Democratic agenda item. What are we seeing there?
Right. So Biden said Biden actually is going to sign an executive order saying that if you are a federal contractor, the minimum wage is going to rise from what it is currently, which is $10.90, and it's going to rise to $15. That, of course, is the target that progressives such as Bernie Sanders and AOC, they want the minimum wage to be $15 everywhere in the economy. That's very tough legislation. So Biden is doing what he can. The White House says, now this is not federal employees, this is federal contractors. So if you work for a company that does contracting for the federal government, you are going to get paid at a minimum of $15. This will go into effect basically in March of next year. And let's say you're making the minimum at that point, $10.90. You're literally going to get a $4.10 per hour raise. That's a 37% raise you're going to get overnight. So it's probably about 300,000 or 400,000 workers. It's not a huge number of workers relative to the whole economy, but those people are going to see a meaningful raise overnight once we get to March of 22.
Rick, also just going back to these potential increases on income tax rates for wealthy Americans, of course, much of that revenue is going to be going towards these infrastructure proposals that Biden has. And I'm wondering, if the ultimate tax rate does have to come down, are there alternative ways to actually fund some of these proposals? Or does that overall price tag for the infrastructure plan just have to come down?
There are tons of ways you can fund these different proposals, and Biden has proposed so many different things, and more is coming tomorrow with the so-called American Families Plan that I think it's very hard for anybody to keep track of what tax he wants to raise and to spend on what. And of course, Biden can roll out these plans, but it's Congress that decides all this, and we've only seen a very small amount of this legislation so far. One big battle to watch. Business groups say instead of raising the corporate tax to pay for infrastructure, we should rely on user fees. That's tolls and things like the gasoline tax. But guess what? Users don't want to pay user fees anymore. So we have not had an increase in the federal gasoline tax that pays for roads and bridges since 1993. There's talk about possibly finding a way to tax drivers on the amount of miles they drive. I'm actually doing some reporting on that today. But then, the government would have to put a tracking device in your car, basically, to figure out how many miles you've traveled and then tax you on that. And I don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon. So we're going to have a really big fight, some interesting ideas, and we'll see where it shakes out by the end of this year.